Hi, Studio Recap here. Today, we're going to talk about a movie called Carriers in sci-fi and horror genres. Spoiler alert is on. Watch out and take care. You won't believe how much your support means. Thank you so much for your support. The film starts with two brothers, Brian and Danny, who are traveling with their girlfriends. Brian's girlfriend is named Bai, and Danny's girlfriend is named Kate. They're playing a game of 20 questions when Kate asks about death. Brian gets upset and angrily asks if this is the right time for such a question. While talking, Brian argues with his brother and takes his hands off the wheel, causing the car to veer off the road. They come across a van blocking the road. The driver, a man, asks for gas. He and his daughter are stranded. We see Brian quickly rolling up the windows. He has no intention of helping and just wants the man to move his van. Kate notices that the girl in the van is infected. Brian rushes off the road, and just then, the man tries to break the car's window with a wrench, but Brian drives past the van, distancing himself from them. Robbie sadly says that the man and his daughter will die there. Brian nonchalantly says that everyone will die eventually. The whole country was infected, and Brian had set rules for survival. You have to avoid the infected people, because even their breath is contagious. Anything they touch must be disinfected. And in the end, trying to save the infected is pointless because they'll die anyway. Very soon, their car breaks down. Danny, realizing the car can't be fixed, suggests they go back to the man's van and use it. Kate angrily insists they shouldn't get close to the infected girl. In the end, they wear gloves and masks and head toward the man's van with disinfectant gallons. The man named Frank introduces himself. Brian pulls out his gun. Frank goes toward the van and says it might be infected, so shooting him would spread his blood in the van, making it unusable. Frank had heard on the radio that there's a serum for a disease being developed at a school outside of Farmington. Brian mocks Frank, considering his efforts pointless. Danny comes up with the idea to put Frank and his daughter Judy in the back of their car, seal the place with plastic, and disinfect it completely. Soon, Bobby becomes friends with Judy. They move their stuff into Frank's van. Danny takes a childhood photo of him and his brother from their car and moves it to the van. The radio broadcasts a sermon from a priest who compares the infected people to weeds. A lie breaks out between Frank and Brian, and soon after, the priest starts coughing on the radio, seemingly infected as well. Bobby, tired of Brian's behavior, hits him, causing him to veer off the road. Kate, having gotten a bit closer to Frank, gets out of the car to get some fresh air. They spot a car, but when trying to get gas from it, they see the fuel cap is locked. Danny opens the door to look for the key, but finds an infected man slumped on the driver's seat, decayed. To get the keys, Danny has to lean down. At that moment, the man with a terrifying look opens his eyes, and Danny, scared, falls to the ground and quickly shuts the car door. They sail for the night. Judy asks about a childhood photo of Danny. Danny says it's a picture from when he and Brian used to spend every summer with their family in Turtle Beach. They're on their way there now. Frank asks how they know it's safe there. Danny replies that it's abandoned, and they plan to hide there until the virus dies out and humanity is wiped out. Brian and Bobby get a little distance from the others, start goofing around, and in the middle of all this mess, they get a little intimate. Suddenly, gunshots and sound of a vehicle approaching are heard. They quickly put out the fire to stay hidden. They see a man getting out of his car, running away, but he's shot by pursuers. The next day, as they drive, they see the dead man's body marked with a sign that reads, "The virus came from Asia." They reach Farmington and find the deserted town filled with bodies. They want to enter the school, but Judy doesn't want to stay alone, so Bobby says she'll stay with Judy while the rest go back. Brian warns Bobby not to near a girl. When they enter the school, it's mostly empty. Kate tries to make a call from a payphone, but the line is dead. They notice a shadow and follow it, leading them to the school's gym, where they find empty beds and, at the end of the room, a doctor and several children. When Frank finds out the doctor died a few days ago, he asks about the serum. When the man returns, they see he's also infected. He prepares a drink full of potassium for the infected children, which he gives them as a medicine. It turns out the serum only stopped a disease for 3 days, and it only caused more suffering for the infected. The man pulls down the curtain, but Kate begs him to change his mind. Brian says nothing can be done. Frank, knowing that the kids will die from drinking the beverage, angrily asks Brian to give him his weapon. Brian refuses, but Danny quickly grabs the gun and tosses it to Frank. Frank points it at the man and shouts for him not to do it. The man calmly says sometimes choosing life is more painful than death. Frank lets go of the weapon. Meanwhile, we see Bobby playing with Judy. Suddenly, Judy collapses to the floor of the car, unable to breathe. Bobby, scared and unsure, picks up plastic to get the oxygen tank to Judy. Suddenly, Judy coughs up blood, splattering Bobby's face. Bobby panics and wipes her face, then raises the plastic. She then notices blood on her jacket, quickly takes it off and hides it under the seat. The others arrive. Frank opens the van and sees Judy on the floor of the car, but Bobby says nothing. Minnie needs to use the bathroom. Frank, knowing that Brian leaves them alone at every opportunity, asks Judy to go by herself. But Judy collapses after taking a step. Frank picks her up and tells Danny they'll be back soon. Brian quickly starts unloading their stuff. Danny doesn't want to leave, but Brian forces him into the car and they drive off. Frank distracts Judy so she doesn't realize they've left. Everyone begins sanitizing the car, and Bobby secretly throws her bloody jacket under the car. After that, they head to a rest stop. Bobby goes to the kitchen, and we see she doesn't let Brian touch her. Brian thinks Bobby is upset about Frank and Judy's situation, and again reminds her that those infected are no different from the dead. Bobby anxiously looks at herself in the mirror but feels hopeful because she has no symptoms. Brian finds a pool, and while searching it, he finds a dead body and slips suddenly. The pool was full of debris and filth. Brian holds himself and screams for help. Danny comes to his brother's aid and saves him. Then 4 of them go to play golf. Brian crashes the golf cart into the sand and reaches out to Bobby, but Bobby holds a golf club towards him. Brian pulls her towards himself and begins kissing her. Bobby angrily tells him her clothes will get dirty and walks away. The remaining 3 continue to play. A little later, they break the windows of the rest stop with golf balls. In one of the rooms, we hear a man's voice on radio saying they're returning. Kate tries calling wherever she finds a phone, but the lines are down. She's worried about her parents, but Bobby says they've been dead for a while, just like everyone else. Suddenly, they see lights from outside and start to flee. They hide in the kitchen and arm themselves with knives. A man enters but doesn't see them. When he exits, he notices one of the knives is missing. Eventually, Danny and Kate get caught. Brian notices the man and attacks him with a golf club, removing the man's mask. The man begs them not to touch him and explains that they left to get food and have now returned. Danny, Kate, and Bobby, who had been captured, come in. After seeing the body in the pool, the men think Brian is responsible for the man's death. But one of the men says maybe he was infected himself. They've been using protective gear and being very careful not to get infected. Brian mocks their extreme behaviors. One of the men says the girls will stay with them. Brian disagrees, but they order Bobby and Kate to strip. The men scream and back away when they see Bobby's boils. All 4 are silently in the car wearing masks and gloves. They stop at a gas station. Kate asks Danny to talk to Brian about Bobby. Danny approaches Brian, but his brother doesn't even let him speak. They continue driving without fuel. After a while, Brian stops and tells Bobby to get out of the car. Bobby begs them to let her stay, even in the trunk. But Brian cruelly drags her out of the car, leaving her some water and food and telling her to find a comfortable place before she gets too weak. Then, tearfully, he leaves her. They see a car driving in the opposite direction. Brian speeds up and blocks their way. There are 2 women in the car who refuse to give Danny any fuel. During Danny's unsuccessful negotiation, Brian shocks his brother by shooting the driver. Danny tries to stop his brother. The other woman shoots Brian in the leg, but she too is killed by Brian. Kate heads to the car to take some gasoline. Meanwhile, a fight breaks out between Danny and Brian. Brian angrily says he's fighting for survival, but Danny isn't capable of doing the same and sees everything through his eyes. This is when we learn that they left their parents behind while they were infected, though Danny thought they had died. Danny stops fighting and falls asleep one way, dreaming that he's back home, finding Bobby decayed on the bed in his parents' room. Kate was driving, and Brian was resting. They stop near a house to find some medicine for Brian. When Danny enters the house, he sees an old woman's corpse with a gun. She'd been dead for a long time. Danny disinfects the gun. Then, after hearing strange noises, he thinks someone is alive, but soon realizes the noise is from a dog eating a corpse and celebrating with it. This disgusting scene makes him sick. After grabbing a medicine, Danny encounters the dog, and, forced to fight it off, he ends up shooting it. After that, they leave the house and Danny asks Brian to take off his pants to disinfect his wound. We see that Brian is infected. Danny puts on his mask and, horrified, dresses his brother's wound. Danny looks at the gun, but Brian takes it away from his brother's sight. Danny tells Kate that Brian is infected. Brian sits in the back of the car behind a plastic barrier. They stop somewhere for the night. We see Brian is worse now. He asks for the keys to make sure they won't leave him behind. Brian starts dozing off and Danny, with Kate's signal, goes to his brother to take the keys. Danny grabs the gun from Brian and gives it to Kate. The keys Danny takes aren't for the car. In fact, Brian had hidden the real keys. Kate gives the gun to Danny so they can get rid of Brian. Danny comes out, but Brian doesn't give him the keys. Brian says, "If you want the keys, either kill me or take me with you and don't let me rot here alone." Danny reminds his brother of the rules, but Brian, now near death, no longer cares about the rules he had set. In the end, Danny shoots his brother. The next day, after burning everything, they set off and eventually reach the beach. But we see Danny reflecting the sorrows of the past when he and his brother were there. After his brother, he feels a sense of emptiness and loneliness. 8:26.